Or I'm not sure if I'm happy with what I'm doing. Koreans want to get it right, but there really are no right answers for life. You just have to experiment. It's never too late. And then now what you have to work on. It is a term that we use a lot in English. The sweet spot, it's like the place of kind of perfection, place of great balance, the place where contradictions are evened out, the place where we feel most comfortable. So, I have this image that all of us are living in the eye of a hurricane or a typhoon. The wind circles around, but in the center it's quite still. And we're all trying to get to the center all the time. And because, it's calm in the center, but we get thrown off and then suddenly we're in the winds of the typhoon. And sometimes it's every 10 minutes and sometimes it's every hour or a couple times a day. But, we just get settled and like, okay, everything's working out, it's fine. And then, we get knocked again. What I talk about the need constantly to recenter. And I had the idea that at this stage in my life, I would have figured out how to stay in the center of the hurricane, the eye of the storm, so to speak, and not get thrown around by the high winds. But I didn't do that. And about 10 years ago, I realized, that's never going to happen. And so the sweet spot is really that center that we're all trying to get to and stay at. The process, the things I talk about, have been what allowed me to very seamlessly and without even noticing develop a way of being in the world that I just very carefully move myself back to the center. Once again, without even noticing. Sometimes it happens really fast, sometimes it happens more slowly, but it's constantly happening and it happens all day long. The one I think that stands out most for Koreans, and this is probably the thing that Koreans ask me about more than any other single issue. It's like, hey, I'm trying to figure out what's the best way for me to do this, or what's the most ideal way for me to reach this goal over here, or I'm thinking about changing my job, or I'm not sure if I'm happy with what I'm doing, and I feel like I want to make some kind of change. And this is true of people who are 20 years old and people who are 50 or 60 years old. The other day I was speaking with someone who is 65 years old, and they were talking about really making some changes in their life to be more happy and be more content and feel like they could be a more positive contributor to the people around them. And this is so common with Koreans. Koreans want to get it right. There's the way of, it comes out of the way Koreans study. There's a right answer for things, and you train young kids to take these exams and memorize the answers and get the right answer. But there really are no right answers for life itself. You just have to experiment. And the one lesson that I have learned over and over again is that for every positive thing that happens to me, something negative will also occur. And for every negative thing that happens to me, something positive will also occur. And once I really understood that, and once I started living according to that, then everything that happened to me was okay. And so altering my path meant that I don't know what the best thing is for me. If I try to change my path and something negative happens as a result of that, well, what's beyond that next thing could be the most ideal thing for me. I have an example of that. The reason 8 years ago I made that short video about BTS was because I woke up in the morning, I didn't know what I was going to talk about in class. And so I wasn't prepared. And the day before I was really busy and I should have been more prepared and I wasn't. And I was really struggling with, I gotta figure out what to talk about. And then I heard a radio story on the BBC about BTS breaking the record that Taylor Swift had set. And I said, oh, God, I gotta talk about that thing. I have to discuss that, So I just went in without any notes or really anything and just talked about that. Well, if I had been prepared, I never would have had the idea to talk about that, and then I wouldn't be sitting here with you having this interview. And so you see, it was a failure on my part to actually open up some doorways. One of the things that so many Koreans struggle with is confidence, and just not being confident with what they're doing. Because, it's about success, it's about working really hard and doing things right. being really good. And of course, there's a lot of success here in Korea. So, there are many challenges to get it right. But what it also means is that, Koreans can miss out on opportunities because they're so focused on success that they miss out on the ways in which failure may not really be failure and success may not really be success. So just because someone else says that something would be successful doesn't mean that it is. And because somebody else thinks, somebody in Korean society, because there's a very strong message about what is successful and what is a failure. Because someone thinks something is a failure doesn't mean that it's a failure. And so, I was lucky in that I didn't have people around me when I was young who were telling me what would be successful, how I could be successful, and how I could be a failure. I had nobody. I had no guidance at all. And so I didn't know what would be a successful life for me, but I also never defined failure because nobody told me that anything I did could be a failure. And so I wasn't worried about that. I wasn't thinking about it. And that means that when I started to try different things out in the world, I wasn't thinking about where I needed to get to in order to live a successful life. I was thinking, let me try things out in the world and see what happens as a result of my actions. And I think that Koreans here in Korea would benefit from being less concerned about very specific successful outcomes that they already have in mind when they begin the process of changing their paths or doing something or trying something out in the world. Because we never know what is a success and what is a failure. Every failure leads to something positive. In fact, for me, I've only learned from my failures. I've given thousands and thousands and thousands of lectures, and some of them are really terrible. But I learned from those. And these days, I rarely have a bad lecture because I learned from all my failures over time. And these days, I never have a great lecture because I don't define what I do in terms of good and bad. So that means every class I do or every talk or interview that I do is perfect. That's just perfect because it is what it is. I tell for people who are younger, what I say is, think about this idea all the time. When you get to the end of your life, you will see that every single failure that you had turned into something positive. And you have to live with that idea. For me, when I started to live with it, it meant that everything that I did, everything, like I missed the subway stop and I had to go turn around and go to a different one, or, there's a traffic jam and I'm late for my appointment. Everything that happens, something positive comes as a result of that. And you have to change your way of thinking so that you integrate this into the way you operate day after day. And for people who are older, all they have to do is look back. I tell people, just look back at your life and see how true this is, and then begin to operate on the basis of that. It's easier to do when you're older. It's very satisfying, actually. And so the shift can happen much more quickly. Here and everywhere in the world, people are trying to build leaders and trying to, hold people up to be better leaders, to take a step forward and take those roles. My wife had this idea many years ago that being a really good follower is just as important as being a really good leader. Because followers don't just follow. They do many, many different things. And you can be a bad follower and you can be a good follower. And the good follower is the one who really pays attention to the kind of leadership that is around them, and then they adjust the way they follow accordingly. And it's different for every single situation, but I think it would be really valuable for Koreans. It's very valuable for Koreans to see this idea of following as very, very important, because Koreans do it very, very well. Koreans are able to accept a certain leadership and go with the leadership because Koreans are so connected to other people around them that they can work together in a collective way to bring about very positive results to whatever it is that is happening. And so followership is a really, really good idea, to not feel like, I should be more of a leader. I should be more outgoing. I shouldn't be so shy. I should step up. But no, you could also just be a really good follower, and that has great value. The sweet spot in all of this is that balance between leading and following. Everything is about balance, and it's about not struggling, but really just being in that space of balance and ironing out or flattening out the contradictions. You know, in terms of individuals, everybody wants to be happy, and everybody wants to be content. And the greatest source of content is not being in the eye of the hurricane and being thrown around constantly, because in our minds, we're wishing that something was different than how it is. Always trying to be somewhere else, or always being thrown off by the things that happen to us. Just as a way of living in the world. You know, we're on our way to our appointment and suddenly we hit a traffic jam. You can't stop those things. You can't stay, oh, I should have left earlier, or I should have gone a different direction. Because there's going to be another problem when you do that. So we're constantly struggling to be in this place of calm and contentment. We all want that. Everybody wants that. I don't live in a permanent space. I'm always readjusting, as we all are. And I think for me, Korean society itself benefits when more and more people are feeling content, feeling good about their lives, about their successes, about the failures, about altering the path, not feeling good enough. You know, I have conversation after conversation with Koreans who are just uncertain about whether the way they're living their lives is the best way they could possibly be living their lives. And I'm always saying, it's the best way. Of course it is, because it's the way you're doing it. So now what you have to work on is how to make the changes that you want to make without feeling that you're in a really bad place. I would say that to me is the greatest lesson that probably people all over the world can benefit from. The single sentence that I would offer to Koreans is the size of your curiosity is the size of your life. Remain curious. It's so valuable and so important. And I think if there's any one thing that has defined my life and how and why I'm even here in Korea, it's because I'm curious. I'm so fascinated by the world, and I'm so fascinated by everything about the world, and in particular human beings who are different from me, from a different culture, and I want to know. I want to know what lessons they have for me, what they can teach me about living more fully in my own life. And so the size of my curiosity is immense. It's immense, and the size of my life is equally as immense. When I'm here in Korea, I stay at the Pentas. Part of it's a hotel, and the part of it's Silvertown. You know, so I'm around so many Korean retirees, and I'm amazed at the conversations that I have with them about the world, about their lives, about everything. Whatever comes into this conversation, and I'm really struck by the curiosity that so many have, and that so many do not have. And it feels, when I'm talking to people, these are all retired people, when I'm talking to them, those that have the curiosity have a light in their eyes. I can see it. It's just shining out of their eyes. And those who don't have curiosity, I just feel like they're just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This is true all over the world, but just speaking right here in Korea, I just happen, every time I come, to have the opportunity to speak with retired Koreans, and I see the same thing all the time. So my take on it is build the curiosity, keep it, invest in it. And I have met people who, after they've been retired, they've become more curious because they're not working every day. They're not doing the same things day after day. And so they actually have really fertile curiosity that they didn't have when they were younger. So it's never too late. 안녕하세요, subscribers of Big Questions. You know, I sometimes get the transcript of Big Questions and translate it into English because some of the interviews are so fascinating for me, and it's one of the places where I go to learn more about Korea. So I'm honored to be on the program, and I'm happy to be able to say hello.